thank you, Kazuma, and all on your team. I hope Martin, Scott, and all the ones that I don't know for putting this conference together. And so thank you for having me here. Let's start with witnessing. Before we go to global social, what is witnessing? What does it mean to be a witness of? And every time there is a witness, it means that something happens with a certain awareness. It's very important that in the kind of inner practice, in the spiritual practice, we develop a witnessing capacity, which means one human being is becoming aware of his or her internal process. And the fact that we are saying is becoming aware of means is not fully aware yet, which means since Freud, scientifically, there was a whole evolution of psychology. We know that none of us can really point out right now where our unconscious rests, really. None of us can say, oh, it's there, it's behind me, it's above me, it's in me, yeah, but what does it mean? So it's very hard to pinpoint the unconscious, although many processes are happening there right now that we are not aware of. So witnessing, like a consciousness development, means that I develop a certain awareness and consciousness in order to feel and see and know my internal processes. And we know that many of the defense functions of our own development were and are very intelligent processes that we put in place in order to deal with overwhelming situations. So most of those processes are now switched unconscious. We just see the symptoms of those processes. And many people in the last, especially in the West, in the last decades, many decades now, are developing their internal awareness in order to become aware of those processes that we usually call difficult or problematic. Every time I meet a problem or a difficulty, as kind of a signpost to point towards that which I don't see. And later in our conversation with Otto, I think Otto is also here right now, like Otto uses this word, this term absencing, which I like very much. I often describe the unconscious, the first time I was on a plane coming to Kathmandu because we did meditation workshops in the Himalayan mountains. And so I flew into Kathmandu at night and I sat on the plane. And then I said, wow, that's super interesting. Because in Kathmandu, they turn off the electricity in certain quarters of the city because there's not enough money to pay for it or produce it. And so I sat on the plane and I looked down at Kathmandu at night, and you see, we all know how cities look like at night. And then I looked at the city and said, wow, interesting. This black spot, I can't really say what happens there, or what is that black spot. From the plane perspective, it looks like dark. It can be a forest, it can be a lake, it can be a mountain, it can be part of the city. And if it's a part of the city, a lot of things are happening there and I don't see anything. And then I said, wow, that's a genius explanation of the human unconscious. The I has many processes that are happening in the parts of our nervous systems that are down-regulated, switched numb or unconscious, and we can't tell what's happening there, but we see effects. And so through our work, we 15 years ago or even longer, I encountered my first collective trauma processes in large gatherings that we had. And then I started to understand something that I think also in the conversation with Otto we want to address is that there are not only those parts in us that are unconscious, but that they're actually, we have been born into quarters of the city that are dark. We have been born into a pre-traumatized society. So global social witnessing is an attempt or a practice where we, in a way, consciously address a basic assumption in society, and that is that we are separate. And because trauma induces a feeling of separateness, aloneness, being disconnected, being hyperactivated and numb, absence, and a lack of responsiveness, which means I cannot respond to my given life situation from my core intelligence, from a place of resonance. And so some years ago, we started to induce the practice in our community that we said, okay, what if I just practice to take one news feed, one headline, something that happened in society, either in our neighborhood or on the other side of the planet, it doesn't really matter. And can I represent what happens seemingly outside, inside? Because every time, in all the places where I'm unconscious or traumatized, I cannot. One function of trauma is that the internal experience and the external experience are split. A function of trauma is a fragmentation. Trauma is actually that the trauma response in our nervous system is a very interesting mechanism, because the nervous system says, wow, when there is an overload, and this might happen to a 5-week-old baby, to a 5-year-old boy, or to a 17-year-old, or to a 50-year-old person. Doesn't matter. If there is a strong overload, then in order to survive better, I cut off the part that is strongly overloaded. Why? Because I need to stay in formation. The most dangerous thing for a nervous system is chaos. And so when a child grows up in a lot of fear because the parents are not around and it's a chronic state, the child is always in a high level of stress. Until one moment that the child decides, click. It's like you have a movie screen, a big TV, and you see a crazy scene, and then you take the remote control and mute it. Click. And then you still see it. But you don't hear any noise anymore. And then you take the movie screen and you throw it in the ocean. Boom. And then it slowly drops into the ocean. You still see the crazy scene going on, the movie, but slowly, slowly it disappears in the dark of the water. And why am I talking so much about trauma? Because I believe that global social witnessing is a tremendous cultural remedy. Because if the trauma induces that my outside and my inside cannot be synchronized, that relation is hurt, that my perception doesn't represent anymore the outside reality. So with other words, we can say for example, I see B, when Belinda introduced me, and I look at Belinda while she speaks, I don't see really Belinda. I see Belinda coated in my perception. Belinda happens already in my nervous system. The Belinda that I see is only the Belinda that I see. It doesn't mean that that's the Belinda that sits out there. I don't know who's sitting really out there. I only know what I see, what I feel, what I perceive. And so when trauma hurts our perception, there's a kind of a distortion in the way we experience the world, other people, ourselves, in the traumatized areas. And since we know that more and more, like the trauma of the former generations, like the Holocaust, the Second World War, sits in our epigenetic environment, sits in our psychology, sits in our education system, sits in the way we have been brought up. And so that's only one part of the world. Take slavery, take any other dictatorship or war around the world. The after effects of massive traumatizations are sitting between us as social structures, and as Otto puts it beautifully, as absent networks or areas in our cultural body. The accumulation of all our absences is social absencing. And so when we hear about the terror attack or somebody taking a gun and going into a school, shooting around, or if we hear something that happened in our neighborhood, the question is, what can we really hear? And so global social witnessing was or is a kind of a practice to, first of all, not induce that we should be able to perceive dramatic events or world events in general, like even the coronavirus and everything that's happening in our societies. We are not saying we should be able, because should be is already a symptom of trauma. It's already that I'm out of my perception. I'm out of my felt experience of the world. Then I should. Then I need to manipulate my interior world in order to fit into my mental concept of my experience. So we are not saying I should be able to witness the world. All I'm saying when we develop this practice is, let's become aware what we are able to, what is actually the process, not where should we get to. The ideal is not that I can do it. Like when somebody doesn't trust, the remedy, like if I'm deeply mistrustful because I have been hurt, the remedy is not to trust. The remedy is to not trust, but consciously. To find out what not trusting actually is. Because I don't want to put another stressor on top of myself, how I should be. Or when I feel closed and held back, like let's say I come into a group like this, and I feel a bit careful, I feel a bit held back. I'm afraid maybe to speak in front of many people. That if that's my inner reality, the remedy is not to be open. The remedy is to bring awareness, witnessing to the process that's actually happening. In all our healing and integration work that we are doing in so many workshops with thousands of people, there the deepest healing happens in the synchronization of awareness with the current process. So global social witnessing is a practice to bring witnessing to maybe the fact that when I read the news, I cannot be present to what I'm reading. And present means that I have a physical, emotional, mental, relational experience of what I read about, what I hear about. The neighbor tells me about something that's happening in the neighborhood. Or my neighbor tells me that he lost his job because of the corona crisis. If I am afraid myself to lose my job, chances are very high that I can't feel my neighbor really. Chances are very high that it will trigger the fear in me that I will lose my job too. And so, can I be a witness just to my neighbor, a compassionate witness? Or does what my neighbor experienced, or the school where the guy went to and shot around, or anything else that happens in society, is this really landing in an embodied way in my being? Then I am a witness. I'm a physical witness. I know how it feels in my body. I'm an emotional witness. I can represent emotion or the traumatic numbness that happens in this event. I can have a mental understanding, and I'm still in a relation with the event. But in many events, I will not be able to do it because it overwhelms me to hear about it. And then I might say I go to my rationalization, and then I'm numb. I cannot feel my emotions, let alone my body experience, the stress that it causes in me or that it touches in me. But then I have a rational oh, it's not so bad. Either I will worry about it rationally, or I will go into a state of rational avoidance. And then I'll say, oh, I'm so informed. We are all so informed nowadays about what's going on in the world. Yeah, we are informed, but only in a specific bandwidth, because I believe most of the people consume way more information than we can digest. And so if we consume more information than we can digest, where does the rest go? If I read the news every day because I'm concerned about corona, concern is a great way to get overwhelmed. Because if I'm concerned about the current corona crisis, I might find myself every day on the news, reading how many people are getting sick here, how many people died here, how many people, whatever happened there and there. And then I might distance myself more and more from my actual process. And the gap is filled with unconscious stress until I get very tight, tighter and tighter, because I lose my inner kind of balancing function, how I maybe get stressed, but then I have time to digest my stress, like food. We need to eat, and when we eat, a certain part of our nervous system gets activated to digest. The same part of our nervous system is also active when we digest psychological stuff, emotions, physical stress, in order to ground myself again in the current experience. And I think you did some attunement at the beginning of when I wasn't there, at the beginning of this meeting. And that attunement means that the internet, for example, the medium that we are using, can be a very mental medium. It's kind of information. Or it can be a mental, emotional, physical sense. That's what it means. It makes sense. When something makes sense, doesn't mean that I rationally got it. Because I can write a PhD about childhood trauma, but be very traumatized myself. So my PhD doesn't help me to really embody healing. In order to embody healing, I need to go through an emotional and physical process to digest the overwhelming experience of my attachment process in order to feel more whole and responsive as a human being in my own relations, my own parenting, my own intimate relation, my own leadership in society. And so when we are sitting here right now, when you look, for example, at the images, I can see an image or I can feel a whole person. I can feel your body through my body. My body knows pretty well what's happening in your body right now, if I want to. My emotions know pretty well what happens in everybody's emotions right now. My mind can listen to your mind, but our experience in the virtual field is actually much more than just, oh, I see an image of Roman, and now I just see him. No, my body feels Roman. In the moment I go into a deeper synchronization with him, there's much more information, which means through that inner practice of real embodied witnessing, we can ground the internet, we can embody the internet. Embodying the internet means that virtual information transmits everything, all of who we are. And people that do our courses know this, that when we start to do attunement practices via the internet, there are many refined perceptions that we can perceive. And the mind would say, how come? I'm sitting thousands of kilometers away from many people here, and still the perception can be very refined. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I think witnessing, in order to come back to the term global social witnessing, witnessing is a very complex process. It sounds very simple at first, but in order to really witness something in a non-dissociated way, I can witness my dissociation, but it means that I cannot witness the full process that I think I experience. So I might read something on the news. I rationally understand what I'm reading, but emotionally, I'm already overwhelmed by my own things that get triggered. So global social witnessing is a similar process. So the first step of global social witnessing, at least in my understanding, is that I pay a precise attention to my own experience when I get in contact with another person, with a piece of news, with something that I hear, read, see on the internet about something that happened somewhere else in the world. And I check my experience and I let go of I should be. Should be is already a symptom of trauma and unconscious processes. I shouldn't be anything. What am I? Not what should I? And so when I synchronize my awareness with the actual process, even if I'm very overwhelmed, because if I feel numb or absent, what am I saying? I'm saying I'm overwhelmed. And maybe I'm not overwhelmed as a grown-up man or as a grown-up woman. Maybe the situation touched a part of me that is overwhelmed, that is much younger. We talked in a recent workshop about democracy is a call for maturity. And what it means is that we can only be in a participatory grown-up, mature place and fulfill the function of a citizen in a democracy. Our regressive parts cannot be part of democracy. They live in other systems. So to grow up and to grow our internal landscape up that the age inside matches approximately the age in our passports is a call for preserving and living our democracy. Which also makes sense because, you know, in medicine or even in many therapeutic contexts, there is this myth of a professional distance or in businesses. So we keep a professional distance. But what is a professional distance? If what's my professional distance to Belinda when she is happening in my brain? Or when I see Kazuma, and Kazuma is happening in my brain. He is already in my perception. So what does mean professional distance? How do I keep a distance? Because Kazuma affects me in the moment I'm in contact with him, and most probably also before that. But let's keep it simple for in the moment I am in contact with Kazuma, I feel him. So maturity and inner regulations are the only way to keep a professional distance. And then it's not a distance, then it's a relation. A healthy relation, a healthy, mature relation is the only way how to stay in a regulated place with our environment. So my place in society is not a place, it's not a thing, it's a constant regulation function because it's only relational. Everybody's place is a movement, not a fixed thing. And so when we have this constant regulation function with our family, with our children, with our team members, with our co-workers, with like peers, friends, society, the government, so then nothing is anymore out there. Everything is interdependent. And in an interdependent world, everything affects everybody. In a traumatized world, their problem is over there and our problem is over here. And there are degrees, of course, of intensity of that. It's not a symbiotic dependent relation, it's interdependent. We went already through an individuation. We are more autonomous in our internal world, but we found out that we are actually constantly related to the world and relating to the world. So if I see Kazuma and if Kazuma experiences a lot of stress or if he's very relaxed and contemplative, his inner experience will affect me. And I have only two ways of regulating myself. One is to find a mature relation. The other one is to contract. If I cannot find a mature relation, I need to numb myself or distance myself inside in order not to be so affected by him. But if distancing is a way how a nurse or a doctor or somebody that is exposed to a lot of crisis, most probably many of us here are working with clients, with groups, with crisis situations. So that in order not, it cannot be, I cannot be not be affected. I can only find a relational regulation with people that are stressed. Because if I see many patients a day in a clinic and they are kind of between life and death, then how do I deal with it? Either I numb myself, which takes a lot of energy, or I feel, but I need to be very present. And so same is, and we will come to, I see that there are questions coming in, we can open the line soon for maybe to respond to some of the questions. But I want to finish the global social witnessing. So there's one aspect of global social witnessing, which is how the world lands in me and what's the relation between me and the world, kind of the entanglement of the individual and the collective. But then there is another level of witnessing, I believe, and that's something I believe this community is also very interested in, but also very much a practice ground for. And that is that same as increasing the awareness within an individual means to create a witnessing function, a non-dissociated witnessing function that is aware of more and more internal processes. It's a conscious human being. If we translate this now to a we space, like we are here now, and how is the we, what is the we composed out of? The we is composed out of the, the conscious aspect, how I'm in contact with myself, how I'm in contact and related to individuals. But then there is the group function that I believe develops its own witnessing if a certain level of coherence within the group can be established. There are certain functions of our individual and collective nervous system that will only arise or emerge in us from a certain level of coherence. They don't exist underneath that. There's a kind of a line. Above this line, we express capacities, abilities. Underneath this line, we don't have them, and we don't even know about them. And many yogic practices for people that went into the mountains and they practice some deep spiritual practice, they started to develop functions that are out of reach for most of the people. Same as groups that came together and developed certain practices from a certain level of community coherence, we actually express new abilities together. And if we are too fragmented, we cannot express those capacities. So there's something about the we presencing. It's like if you imagine you have a kind of, when you see a spotlight, there's a certain radius of light that this spotlight creates. Everything that's in the light is aware of itself. Everything that's outside of the light is in the dark. So if a we space enhances the we awareness, and that's what I see over and over again in groups, if the we space becomes very present, every individual in it becomes more present and aware. So that means that we enhance the individual capacities. We enhance the individual capacities. Same as in collective traumatizations, when we all get very shaky and fragmented, we add to each other's fragmentation too. So if a whole city is being bombed and many people get traumatized, then the collective insecurity and fear and existential fear affects everybody even stronger. And so I think that the global social witnessing is something that I can practice, but there are practices that we can practice as communities to develop those very present containers that, as Otto says beautifully, are touching in to kind of our future, the innovation capacity, but also give us the power to illuminate that which is absent. And if it has been absent before we were born, it's very hard to call that absent, to not call that absent normal. That absence is the way how the world is, because we don't know another world. So everything that was written on the sheet of paper that we have been born into seems like that's the world. And often it takes some real inner kind of practice, inner and outer research, some real dedication to find out what is actually the absence and the hurt aspect in the world that we see every day. Because if it pre-existed my existence, I got it with my genetic environment, I got it with my education process, I saw it in people around me. My teachers carried it partly, my parents, my friends, the society. And so I believe global social witnessing is a very strong practice if we practice it in groups or if people come together to practice it, to increase our awareness that at all we become aware of the absence that we don't know about. Because the nature of absencing is that it's often unconscious that we are absent. The real absence is the one that nobody knows about. And we need to go and track back symptoms to, to be able to find at least the outskirts of where the conscious world ends. And the conscious world is the world that appears within this range of light, and the world that is outside of it is not in our awareness. And so I believe community awareness and community presencing is great for downloading our mutual future, like innovation. But it's equally powerful because we can support each other to see the outskirts of the world that is out of reach. The world that I cannot feel, see, hear, experience, like the part in Kathmandu that is dark. But somehow the symptoms show that something must be there. And so I believe that that's why I really like that you, Kazuma, followed, with all the people that felt also inspired to do this, up with the how can global social witnessing be looked at from various disciplines and approach, because it's such a complex process, but it has the power, I believe, for a real cultural healing process and a real cultural transformation process. The witnessing is way more powerful than just seeing. In many processes, when children have been abused in their family systems, the first moment of real healing is when somebody sees that happened. When somebody is there that infuses witnessing into a process that didn't have it. So just the mere witnessing of a therapist, for example, or somebody that is there and say, I see, is a very powerful process. And I know this kind of talk now was a lot centered on trauma and collective trauma, but I believe that that's at the root of many cultural symptoms that we see. And I think we can have a multidisciplinary approach how to presence and expand our capacity to be a witness of this world. Because to be a witness of the world means that the outside and the inside become more and more synchronized. So what's happening around me and how I represent it in myself becomes a coherent relation. And I think that's the restoration of global social witnessing.